brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that sends 5% of your monthly plan price to your favorite charity. No contracts, nationwide coverage, risk-free guarantee. Learn more at CharityMobile.com.
Francis's war on the traditional Mass continues. We have news of one of the most iconic and historic traditional Masses in all of the United States was shut down this past weekend. It's still ongoing, of course, but it will be ending very, very soon, before the end of Lent. This is sad news, and it was broken on Super Bowl Sunday, when most Catholics weren't really even paying that much attention. They went to their own Masses, they came home and either watched the big game or they ended up doing other things. And so we're going to go right to this story. It comes from a lot of sources. I saw a lot of this on Twitter. I had some emails about this, but I think the best summary of this comes from Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, where he publicly posted a summary of this from his Facebook, and I'll just give you this verbatim. So, quoting from Dr. Kwasniewski, "I've been hearing a lot about the horrible news from Austin, Texas, from an eyewitness. At the end of Mass, it was announced that as of March 19th, the extraordinary form which will cease to be offered at the cathedral. Its replacements will be ordinary form Masses facing east in Latin. That's the Unicorn Novus Ordo. This affects 2 Sunday Masses, with attendance of 600 to 700 people each week. Apparently, this came directly from the Vatican. The community was stunned. This is a major blow to traditional Catholicism in Texas. An enemy hath done this, wolves in sheep's clothing, monsters in clerical attire, savages in black suits, panting and yearning for millstones around their necks, driving the people of God to despair. As I've said many times already, the Catholic Church cannot abolish her most venerable rites without contradicting herself, betraying her solemn obligations, and incurring the wrath of God. Indeed, that sort of mentality and behavior explain why we are at the pathetic point we are at since the Council. And yet, no lessons learned, the demonic drive to purge the past and hamper the spiritual lives of the faithful continues unabated, as a death wish on steroids. If there is something so wrong with the old rites that they must be eliminated, Catholicism is already disproved thereby. If, on the other hand, the new rites were proposed simply as a better way for modern man and designed to fill the pews, then obviously the litmus test is pragmatic. What works? What fills the pews? The war of Rome against the Roman Rite is driven by false ideology and has no legality whatsoever. It's not a just war. Quite the contrary, it's a war of aggression. Meanwhile, good people of Austin, do whatever you need to do, go wherever you need to go, in order to stay true to the faith as embodied in the traditional liturgy. Forget about the Unicorn Novus Ordo. It's not the Roman Rite, it's not your birthright. It's a sop they are throwing you, a dishonor to your intelligence, a burden on your conscience, a treachery to your families. Stay with the rite that nourished our greatest saints and has nourished you until now." End quote. For those who are curious, the bishop of the diocese there is the same bishop who is the temporary bishop of Tyler, Texas. Yes, the same bishop is the one there who is filling in for Bishop Strickland until a replacement bishop is found. It's worth noting that it was the Vatican's decision to do this. My own sources on this say that the actual diocesan offices are asked the Vatican for another extension on the traditional Mass at the cathedral, wanted it for another 2 years. And instead, Rome did what they almost always do in this case. They replied with no. Shut it down, and shut it down now. In response to my Saturday news video on the ending of the traditional Mass, which I continued that coverage here on Monday of this week, I received reports from some people saying that their dioceses were next, that they had been told after Traditionis Custodes was issued that they would get a temporary extension of 2 years for their parishes and their dioceses to comply fully with Traditionis Custodes. They received that notice in 2022, meaning it's sometime this year, and I think in at least one case I saw summer of this year, summer 2024, that they are expected to comply, that they're going to lose their traditional Masses. For those who don't understand our objections to the new Mass, for those who don't understand that this isn't merely a preference issue for us, that there is something much more fundamental, it will be hard to understand why we make such a big deal of this. But as Dr. Kwasniewski says there, if the traditional Mass, the same Mass that developed organically from the time of the Apostles until 1962, if that Mass is dangerous to the faith, then that claim by itself discredits Catholicism. Game over. You cannot have had, for 99% of the history of the Church, essentially the same form of worship in the major areas of the faith in the Latin West, and expect to have that be credible when later such worship was deemed to be harmful to the Church. That is where we are at. Meanwhile, we have the fruits of Vatican II, of the Mass that they are trying to impose on everybody, rearing its ugly head here in, say, up in Seattle, where you have this news from Our Sunday Visitor, the modernist Our Sunday Visitor. Headline: Seattle Archdiocese to consolidate more than 170 parishes. In Seattle, they are turning their diocese into 60 parishes, from 170 to 60. Why? Because, as many people will note when they are being brutally honest with themselves, the ordinary form parishes, anywhere you go, are virtually all older people. Average age of a lot of these parishes, typical average age of a typical parish is 55 years old. That is not sustainable. The typical average age at a traditional parish is something like 30. Do the math. In the Archdiocese of Seattle, they're consolidating down to 60 parishes for the whole Archdiocese. That won't count the cathedral, that won't count a few chapels here and there, other places. Chapels will often not have the full range of sacraments. You need to go to a proper parish for those. It won't count any monasteries with public mass offerings. They're going down to 60 parishes from 170. Let's get some details from the article. Quote, Archbishop Paul de Etienne, February 3rd, released the final list of parish families, that's the term they use, as part of the Archdiocese of Seattle's Partners in the Gospel Strategic Planning Initiative. More than 170 parishes, missions, and stations have been grouped into 60 parish families, 2 or more parishes under the leadership of one pastor. The families go into effect July 1st. Pastors and parochial vicars for parish families will be announced April. This final list of families comes after a year of consultation with the Archdiocese Presbyterial Council, the Partners in the Gospel Oversight Committee, priests, deacons, parish and school staff, lay leaders, and the public, the Archdiocese said in a note accompanying the list. In a letter to the Catholic community, Archbishop Etienne expressed appreciation to all those who have participated in the effort. I am so grateful to the thousands of people who engaged in the consultation process by providing insights during the input phase, sharing new ideas, and praying for this renewal effort. Your input made a significant impact on how the parish families were configured. We spent hours in deep discussions and prayer while listening to the Holy Spirit and discerning our path for the future. End quote. So what is the purpose of this? The purpose is very simple. They say they're doing that to renew the life in the church, to renew the existing surviving parishes. The fact that they call these parish families is abominable. What they do when they close these parishes and consolidate to new ones is destroy the community life of those parishes, to destroy the community life often of the neighborhoods those parishes are in. After all, people will often move to live, will buy property or rent an apartment close to the parishes that they go to for logical reasons. People don't necessarily want to travel far for Mass on a Sunday. How often am I told in my comments, well, all I have is a Novus Ordo near me, and I'm waiting for a traditional Mass near me to go. Well, meanwhile, some of us drive 90 miles or more one way to get to Mass on Sunday. But that is what is happening. That is the springtime of renewal in the Church of the New Advent, in this synodal church. But at least with these parish clusters, these parish families, as they call them now up in Seattle, the diocese at least asked for input from those being affected. That's not always the case in places. You can go back to the 1990s when Chicago was started leading the way on this, and they were closing parishes and clustering parishes together by combining parish communities into new parishes. Often they did this without the input of the locals. Infamously, a lot of these more famous bishops do this without the input or the care of the locals. Or if they get input from them, it's from the high-profile locals, the big money donors at these parishes, or the loudest voices, usually the ones who are on the same page as the bishop on internal ecclesiastical political disputes. That's usually how this stuff works. Welcome to the springtime in the Synodal Church of the New Advent. Now, are you surprised by any of this? I'm not surprised. I am warning people now that we just saw in Austin is going to be a story repeated anywhere you go in the United States. This is coming to a parish near you, a diocese near you, where your high-profile traditional mass will get canceled down. This has happened in France in numerous places where the FSSP were suddenly kicked out of dioceses for no good reason, using the Vatican lingo against traditionalists of saying that they were undermining the unity of the church in the diocese, which is nonsense on stilts. Remember, Traditionis Custodes, or its accompanying letter to the bishops, explicitly instructs the bishops to begin the process of getting traditional Catholics to come back to the Novus Ordo. And so I will close this by reiterating what Dr. Kwasniewski said in his statement. Do not let them take this from you. Drive, if you have to traditional parishes. For those in Austin, there is an SSPX chapel offering Mass every single Sunday in San Antonio and every other weekend in Austin. Do what you have to do. They do not have the right to take this from you. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't, it does help. So does sharing this on social media, that helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.